Clay Ransom didn't come alone. He drove through the open gate in a white pickup with two county surveyors behind him, both wearing reflective vests and carrying equipment Maya Bennett had never invited onto her property. She was standing knee-deep in mud, beside a broken water pump, one hand wrapped around a rusted wrench, the other holding a hose that had just sprayed brown water across the front of her shirt. Behind her, 11 water buffalo watched from the edge of the flooded pasture. Clay stepped out of his truck without closing the door. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. Maya looked at the surveyors. Then she looked at the wooden stakes in the back of their truck. "You planning to measure something?" Clay smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who believed the conversation had already ended and was waiting for everyone else to catch up. "I'm planning ahead," he said. "The bank won't give you forever." One of the buffalo moved closer. She was the oldest female in the herd, broad through the shoulders, dark gray, with a white mark between her eyes shaped almost like a thumbprint. Maya called her Pearl. Clay glanced at the animal. "You know those things aren't cattle, right?" he said. "Nobody around here knows what to do with them. You've got a herd of swamp cows on land that barely qualifies as land." Maya set the hose down. Clay reached into the truck and pulled out a manila envelope. "My offer clears the debt," he said. "You walk away clean. That's more than most people get." He held the envelope toward her. Maya didn't take it. The water pump clicked once behind her, coughed, and stopped. Pearl came another step closer. Clay lowered the envelope. "You've got maybe 2 months before this place belongs to the bank," he said. "After that, you won't get to choose who owns it." Maya wiped the mud from her hand onto her jeans. Then she pointed toward the gate. "Get off my land." Clay stared at her. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Not the surveyors, not Maya, not even the buffalo. Then Clay gave a small laugh, placed the envelope on the hood of her truck, and climbed back into his. As he drove away, one of the surveyors looked back through the window. Maya stood in the mud until all 3 vehicles disappeared down the gravel road. What Clay Ransom didn't know was that the animals he had just called worthless were about to become the most valuable herd Maya had ever seen. But 3 months earlier, she hadn't known that either. 3 months earlier, Maya Bennett had been working mornings at a hardware store and evenings at a roadside diner outside Baton Rouge. She was 28 years old, 12 credits short of a degree in natural resource management, and carrying enough unpaid bills that she kept them in separate piles based on which company was most likely to shut something off. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. She opened it in the break room during lunch because the return address belonged to a law office she didn't recognize. Her great-aunt Lucille was dead. Maya had met Lucille exactly 4 times. Lucille had been her grandmother's younger sister, a quiet woman who lived somewhere south of town and sent birthday cards with $5 bills inside until Maya turned 16. According to the letter, Lucille had left Maya everything: a farmhouse, a barn, 116 acres, 11 water buffalo, and $94,000 in debt. Maya read that last part twice. Then she called the attorney. "What happens if I don't accept it?" she asked. "The bank completes the foreclosure," he said. "The land and livestock will be sold with the rest of the estate." "What happens to the animals?" There was a pause. "That would depend on the buyer." Maya looked through the break room window at the parking lot. A shopping cart rolled slowly across the pavement in the wind. "How long do I have?" "Roughly 5 months before the bank takes formal possession." 2 days later, she drove out to see the place. The last mile of road was gravel. The final quarter mile was mostly mud. The farmhouse leaned slightly to the east. The barn roof had 3 visible holes. Half the fencing had been repaired with wire that looked older than Maya. And nearly 70 acres of the property were wet. Not damp, wet. Standing water sat between clumps of grass. Cypress knees pushed through the surface. Reeds grew chest-high near the southern boundary. Every conventional farming instinct Maya had ever been taught told her the same thing: problem land. Then she saw the buffalo. They stood in water up to their knees, moving slowly through the reeds, pulling at plants Maya couldn't identify. They were larger than she expected, heavier, quieter. One of them lifted her head and looked directly at Maya. The buffalo had a white mark between her eyes. Maya stayed outside the fence. The buffalo walked toward her anyway. Not quickly, not aggressively, just steadily. She stopped on the other side of the wire and breathed through her nose. Maya reached out. The buffalo lowered her head slightly, allowing Maya to touch the rough hair between her horns. "Hi," Maya said. The animal stood there. That was the moment Maya made the worst financial decision of her life. Or the best one. For the first month, it was difficult to tell. She signed the inheritance papers, left her apartment, paused her degree again, and moved into Lucille's farmhouse with $418 in savings and a car that needed new brakes. The kitchen sink leaked. The back bedroom ceiling leaked. The barn leaked in so many places that Maya stopped counting and started moving buckets. People in town learned about her almost immediately. They also learned about the buffalo. At the feed store, a man named Calvin Price looked at her order and asked what kind of cattle she was feeding. "They're water buffalo," Maya said. Calvin stared at her. "In Louisiana?" "Yes." "On purpose?" She didn't answer. He leaned against the counter. "You know beef cattle sell, right?" "I'm aware." "Water buffalo don't." "I'm also aware that you sell feed, and I'm trying to buy some." Calvin sold it to her, but he smiled the entire time like he was watching someone light money on fire. Maya heard similar opinions everywhere she went. Sell the buffalo, drain the land, buy beef cattle, plant soybeans, lease the acreage, take Clay Ransom's offer before the bank took everything. The only person who didn't tell her what to do was Samuel Reed. Samuel lived on 40 acres north of Lucille's property. He was 73, walked with a cane, and had spent most of his career surveying wetlands for the state. He arrived one afternoon while Maya was replacing a broken fence post. He watched her work for a while. "You're setting that too shallow," he said. Maya stopped digging. "You came over here to tell me that?" "No. I came over here because your great-aunt used to make terrible coffee, and I wanted to know if bad coffee ran in the family." Maya looked at him. Samuel looked back. She made coffee. It was bad. Samuel drank it anyway. From the porch, they watched the buffalo move through the flooded pasture. "Everyone says I should drain it," Maya said. "Everyone who?" "Everyone." Samuel nodded. "That usually means nobody's thinking." He pointed toward Pearl, who was pushing through a thick stand of reeds. "Cattle fight land like this," he said. "Those animals don't. They're eating weeds. They're eating forage. You're calling it weeds because you didn't plant it." Maya watched Pearl tear off another mouthful. Samuel leaned back. "Your aunt understood something most people around here forgot," he said. "Land doesn't have to look useful to be useful." The summer turned dry. Pastures across the parish went brown. Farmers began buying hay earlier than expected. Feed prices climbed. Maya's property stayed green. Not all of it. The higher ground dried like everything else. But the flooded pasture held. The buffalo moved through it calmly, eating reeds, grasses, aquatic plants, and vegetation that would have been useless to most livestock. Maya began keeping records: what they ate, where they grazed, how much supplemental feed they needed, which sections recovered fastest after rotation, Pearl's daily milk production. That last number caught Maya's attention. Lucille had owned an old portable milking system. It barely worked, but after 2 weeks of cleaning and replacement parts, Maya got it running. Pearl's milk was thick, thicker than cow's milk. Maya had studied enough animal science to know why that mattered, but she didn't trust herself, so she sent a sample to a lab. The results came back 3 days later. High butterfat, high protein, excellent solids for cheese production. Maya read the report at the kitchen table. Then she read it again. The next morning, she called a Water Buffalo Breeders Association in another state. A woman named Denise answered. Maya explained the herd, the property, and what little she knew. "Do you have registration records?" Denise asked. "I don't think so." "Breeding records?" "I haven't found any." "Milk records?" "Only what I've started." "Then start looking," Denise said. "People don't keep 11 dairy-type buffalo by accident." Maya searched the farmhouse. Nothing. She searched the barn office. Nothing. Then, behind a warped cabinet in a storage room, she found a locked metal box. The key was taped underneath. Inside were 15 notebooks. Every one belonged to Lucille. The first entry was dated 19 years earlier. The notebooks contained breeding dates, calving records, milk volumes, health problems, forage observations, weather patterns, and handwritten notes about small batches of cheese. Lucille had tracked everything. One line appeared over and over. Right animal, right ground. Maya sat on the barn floor for nearly 2 hours reading. Lucille hadn't been keeping strange animals on bad land. She had been building a dairy herd designed for wet country. And she had almost finished. The first calf was born in June, a small female with long legs and ears too large for her head. Maya found her standing beside her mother just after sunrise. Pearl stood nearby, watching. Maya laughed out loud for the first time since moving to the farm. 3 days later, Clay Ransom arrived with an offer. He owned more than 800 acres and controlled most of the drainage access south of Maya's property. He also sat on the parish water management board. His offer was enough to clear the mortgage and leave Maya with less than $6,000. He called it generous. Maya called Denise. "What would registered dairy buffalo milk be worth to a specialty cheese buyer?" she asked. "That depends on the herd, the volume, the testing, and whether you can prove consistency." "What if I can?" Denise gave her a number. Maya wrote it down. The number was nearly 4 times what local dairy farmers received for cow's milk. "What would I need?" "Records, testing, health certification, a buyer who understands the product, and time." Time was the one thing Maya didn't have. She had 91 days before the bank's deadline, so she stopped sleeping properly. She built a herd file from Lucille's notebooks. She paid a veterinarian in installments to examine every animal. She repaired the milking equipment. She tracked milk production morning and evening. She applied for a small agricultural preservation grant. She called cheesemakers, distributors, dairy consultants, and restaurants. Most didn't answer. Some answered and said no. One asked whether she meant buffalo as in bison. Then Samuel gave her a name, Elena Torres. Elena supplied specialty dairy products to restaurants and artisan cheesemakers across the Gulf Coast. Maya called her on a Thursday morning. She had written a script on 3 index cards. She used the first 2. Then Elena asked, "What makes your herd different?" Maya looked through the window at the flooded pasture. "They don't survive the land," she said. "They use it." There was silence on the phone. Maya continued, "They're producing high solids milk with less purchased feed than a conventional dairy system. I have 19 years of breeding and production records. I have current lab results, and I have 11 animals already adapted to this property." Another silence. Then Elena said, "Send me everything." Maya did. 2 days later, Elena called back. I want to visit. When? 3 weeks. Maya looked around the barn. 3 weeks was not enough. It would have to be. She repaired the milking room floor. She installed washable wall panels she found used at an auction. She labeled every record. She fixed 2 gates, replaced a drain, cleaned the storage room, and built a grazing map. The night before Elena arrived, the milk pump failed. Maya worked on it until 2 in the morning. At 6, it failed again. At 7:30, Samuel showed up with tools. You call me? He asked. No. You were hammering metal after midnight. Sound carries. Together, they got the pump working 15 minutes before Elena's truck pulled through the gate. Elena arrived with Dr. Rachel Kim, a dairy nutrition specialist from the state university. They spent 5 hours on the farm. They inspected the animals. They reviewed the lab reports. They walked the pasture. They examined Lucille's notebooks. Dr. Kim asked questions Maya couldn't answer. Maya said she didn't know. Then she wrote each question down. At the end of the day, Elena stood beside Pearl and looked across the flooded field. I'm interested, she said. Maya's chest tightened. But I'm not signing a contract today. The feeling disappeared. I need independent testing, Elena continued. And I need a trial production run with one of my cheesemakers. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Maya had 57 days left. Do it, she said. The trial batch went to a small cheesemaker outside New Orleans. For 6 days, Maya heard nothing. On the 7th day, Elena called. The yield was excellent, she said. Maya sat down. The cheesemaker wants more. I want to discuss a 12-month supply agreement. The first draft was 26 pages. Maya read every one. She objected to the exclusivity clause. Elena pushed back. Maya pushed back harder. They changed it. She questioned the price adjustment formula. They changed that too. When both sides finally signed, the guaranteed minimum revenue was more than enough to cover the farm's debt payments. Maya sent the contract to the bank. The loan officer called the next morning. We're suspending foreclosure proceedings, she said. Maya was standing in the milking room. Pearl was waiting behind her. For the first time in months, Maya had no immediate disaster to solve. She sat down on an overturned bucket. Pearl nudged her shoulder. Maya laughed once, then covered her face with both hands. 9 days later, the certified letter arrived. The Parish Water Management Board had opened a formal investigation into her property. The complaint claimed Maya was illegally retaining water, altering natural drainage, and creating a flood risk for neighboring farms. She had 30 days to provide documentation. Clay Ransom's name wasn't on the complaint. It didn't need to be. Maya called Samuel. He waited until the bank backed off, Samuel said. Why? Because the contract depends on your dairy permit. No permit, no delivery. No delivery, no contract. No contract, bank comes back. Maya read the letter again. What do I need? Historical maps, water flow data. Proof the wetland existed before your operation. Proof your animals aren't damaging it. Can I get that in 30 days? Samuel was quiet. Maybe. The next 2 weeks became a blur. Maya requested state records. Samuel brought old survey maps from work he had done with Lucille 12 years earlier. Dr. Kim connected Maya with a wetland ecologist named Dr. Aisha Coleman. Aisha walked the property, took soil samples, measured water levels, and reviewed satellite records. Her conclusion was direct. The wetland was functioning normally. The buffalo were not blocking water flow. Their grazing was reducing invasive plant density in several areas. Then, Aisha found something else. 8 years earlier, Clay Ransom had expanded a drainage canal on his eastern acreage. That canal had redirected seasonal runoff toward the southern basin, toward Maya's property. Clay wasn't investigating a problem Maya had created. He was trying to blame her for water his own project had helped move. Maya could have submitted the report quietly. Instead, she made a different decision. She announced an open farm day. She invited local farmers, state agriculture staff, university specialists, buyers, restaurant owners, and the regional farming press. She posted the water reports online. She placed copies of every map, test, and herd record in the barn. Clay's allies on the board tried to move the inspection date forward. The request failed by 1 vote. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear. Maya expected 30 people. By 10 o'clock, there were 74. Farmers walked the pasture with Aisha. Dr. Kim explained the milk data. Elena brought 2 cheesemakers and samples from the trial batch. People who had laughed at the buffalo stood in line to taste mozzarella made from their milk. Calvin Price from the feed store found Maya near the barn. He held a small plate with a piece of cheese on it. This came from those animals? Yes. He chewed slowly. Then he looked toward the pasture. My brother-in-law has 60 acres he can't keep dry. Maya almost smiled. Maybe he should stop trying. At noon, a reporter asked Maya whether she believed Clay Ransom had targeted her. Maya looked at the camera. I believe the records speak for themselves, she said. My land was wet before I got here. My great-aunt documented it. The state documented it. The university documented it. And the animals are using that land without destroying it. Do you think the complaint was dishonest? I think people get nervous when something they called worthless starts proving them wrong. The first milk delivery left the farm 19 days later. Maya stood beside the road as the refrigerated truck disappeared around the bend. Then her phone rang. It was Samuel. The board voted, he said. Maya stopped breathing. 4-3. Investigation closed. No violation. She closed her eyes. Samuel continued. They cited the historical maps, Coleman's report, and the state water records. What about Clay? He voted against closing it. Of course he did. Samuel paused. There's more. The state is reviewing his drainage permit. Maya looked across the pasture. Pearl stood in the water, pulling at reeds like none of this had ever been complicated. Maya didn't feel victorious. She felt tired. Deeply, completely tired. But the pressure that had followed her for months was gone. That absence felt almost physical. By December, the preservation grant came through. Maya used it to replace the barn roof, upgrade the milking room, and install proper cooling equipment. She hired a 19-year-old named Jordan to help with morning work. She signed a second contract with a small mozzarella producer, and the herd grew. In February, an older couple named David and Marie Landry visited the farm. They owned 40 acres of wet pasture that had failed as cattle ground for 6 straight years. We heard you might sell breeding stock, Marie said. I might. We can't pay specialty prices, David said. Maya looked at their boots. They were worn in the way real farm boots were worn. Not for appearance, from work. I'll sell you 2 young females below market, she said. David frowned. Why would you do that? Because one herd doesn't build a market, Maya said, and one farm doesn't prove a system. She gave them conditions. They had to use her record-keeping format. They had to share breeding and health data. They had to protect the wetland instead of draining it. And when their herd grew, they had to offer breeding animals fairly to other local farms before selling outside the region. Marie looked toward Pearl. How long before it works? Longer than you hope, Maya said, but probably not as long as you fear. A year after Maya received Lucille's letter, she stood in the same pasture where Clay had handed her the envelope. The pump had been replaced. The fencing was stronger. The barn roof no longer leaked. There were 27 buffalo on the property now, including 9 calves. Pearl still came to the fence whenever Maya walked by. Clay had sold part of his eastern acreage after the state required changes to his drainage system. Maya didn't celebrate that. Over time, she had come to understand that Clay's biggest mistake wasn't simply greed. It was certainty. He had been certain wet ground was bad ground. Certain conventional cattle were the only serious livestock. Certain bigger operations were always smarter operations. Certain Maya would fail because people like her usually did. And when reality stopped agreeing with him, he tried to force it back into place. Maya had made plenty of mistakes too. The difference was that she wrote hers down. She corrected them. She changed her mind when the evidence changed. Lucille's 15 notebooks now sat beside 4 of Maya's own. The pages contained milk records, breeding notes, pasture maps, veterinary reports, failed ideas, revised plans, and questions nobody had answered yet. Maya had once believed the most valuable thing Lucille left her was the herd. Then she thought it was the land. Then the milk contract. She had been wrong every time. The most valuable thing Lucille left was a record of paying attention. Attention to animals. Attention to water. Attention to seasons. Attention to what the land was trying to do before someone arrived with a machine and decided it should do something else. That spring, Maya was invited to speak at a state agriculture conference. She stood in front of 60 people and told them about the first time she saw Pearl. She told them about the debt, the bad roof, the broken pump, the people who called the buffalo swamp cows. She told them about Lucille's notebooks and Samuel's maps. Then she said something she had been thinking about for months. The problem was never that the land was too wet, she said. The problem was that everyone kept trying to put the wrong animal on it. The room went quiet. Maya looked down at her notes. Then she looked back up. People call land worthless when it doesn't produce what they already know how to sell. But that doesn't mean the land has no value. Sometimes it means we haven't learned how to see it yet. That evening, she drove home through the low country. The sun was dropping behind the cypress trees, turning the water gold between the reeds. When she reached the farm, Pearl was waiting near the fence. Maya walked over and rested her hand between the buffalo's horns. A year earlier, she had arrived with $418, an unfinished degree, a failing farmhouse, and no idea what she was doing. Now she had 2 supply contracts, a protected wetland, a growing herd, a repaired barn, an employee, and 3 neighboring farms asking for help starting her model. None of it had happened quickly. None of it had happened cleanly. And none of it had happened because Maya discovered something entirely new. Most of the answer had already been there. In Lucille's notebooks, in Samuel's maps, in the flooded pasture, in the behavior of 11 animals everyone else had dismissed. The knowledge had not disappeared. It had waited. Maya scratched Pearl behind the ear. Then she looked across the water toward the far fence, where the younger buffalo were moving slowly through the grass. "Right animal," she said. Pearl's ear moved. Maya smiled. "Right ground." Then she went inside, made coffee that was still too strong, opened a new notebook, and began to write.